Welcome to the Middle Tech Podcast, this region's leading business podcast shining a light on technology, entrepreneurship, and the future of business in Kentucky and beyond. Our goal is to advance the ecosystem by bringing attention to the founders, changemakers, innovators, and those supporting them. Middle Tech's content can be found on your favorite podcast streaming app, social channels, and YouTube. We encourage you to follow and participate in the conversation. Let's discuss and build the future.
What's going on, everybody? You got Evan Knowles and Logan Jones here with the Middle Tech Podcast. We just had an amazing conversation, really important conversation. Probably one of the most important conversations actually we've ever had with a man named Mark Franco, who is the founder and CEO of MXD Process. So they make industrial mixing equipment for some major companies around the world. He has a chemistry background, and so he used that to build his business. But most importantly, again, this is one of the most important conversations we've ever had on this podcast, and it's one that founders don't seem to want to talk about very often for several reasons. It's faith and it's family. Entrepreneurs just don't typically get that vulnerable, and I think it's because one, these two things, faith and family, are deeply personal. But two, I think it's just people are scared. People are scared to talk about that stuff because, again, it's a sense of vulnerability that people aren't comfortable with, especially a lot of entrepreneurs who are, who think they have to be this perfect person in an imperfect world. And I think that's stupid because I think family and faith for long-term health are integral. They're absolutely needed. If you don't have those things, if at least one of those things, I don't see how you can be a happy person on this planet. So it's important for me to say, Mark isn't preaching. We had a great conversation, and it was just a genuinely open conversation. Everybody that's listening to this, you don't have to have, a family. You don't have to have a faith even to be engaged with this conversation and get value out of this, I don't think. Everyone has their own journey, and at the end of the day, nobody actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to religion. It's all faith. I mean, nobody knows. When we die, we don't know what's going to happen. We have faith that some people might have faith that they know. But I think it's important to know that nobody knows what they're talking about. It's faith. So if you are turned off right now, don't be, because this is a really important conversation that needs to happen more. And I'm really glad Mark stepped out to have this conversation.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't actually get to join this conversation. I had an allergy attack that day that prevented me from actually recording. Evan saw me, I was crying and everything.
It was 4:22, so I thought that was super funny because you were walking around and people were like,
people thought I was high.
Celebrating, huh?
But yeah, so I got to listen to a little bit of the recording after Evan had recorded it and sent it to me. And after listening to some of it, I was like, man, this, like Evan has said multiple times here, this is a really important topic. And it's one that I just wanted to hop on the intro and kind of give my perspective on it as well. I mean, I'm not even really starting a company right now. I'm lucky enough to be involved with Middle Tech and an early stage startup right now, which is a lot. But for me, it's hard for me to even balance like a social life, trying to deal with like getting in a romantic relationship, getting enough sleep, keeping your body healthy. And I feel like at the pillar of all those is my family. Like if I don't have my family, and then secondary to that, exploring in my faith and making sure that my faith can withstand all of these other things being thrown at it all at once, that is at the crux of what makes life worth living, in my opinion. So super excited for you guys to listen to this conversation. We would love to engage in an open conversation about this. That's probably one of my favorite things to do right now, is just understand different perspectives, where people come from, how they were brought up, what they were taught when they were younger. So if something in this episode strikes a chord, whether it's a good chord or whether it's a bad chord, please let us know. We'd love to engage in conversation about that. But this conversation, they covered Mark's background, the role faith played in his entrepreneurial journey, how religion actually allowed him to take more risk in life, which is maybe something that you wouldn't think. And then also how he's balanced having 12 kids. Yeah, 12 kids. Cheaper by the dozen over here. 12 kids with being an entrepreneur. And then also how the Louisville ecosystem has been from his perspective. So before we dive in here, we're just going to get a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Land Betterment. Land Betterment is doing some incredible work throughout Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky as they are taking abandoned strip mines and putting sustainable businesses in their place. These businesses not only provide a useful repurposing of the land, but they also provide great jobs to replace the mining jobs that were lost when the mine was shut down. To learn more about Land Betterment, you can listen to our interview with their founders, Mark Jensen and Kirk Taylor, on episode 97, or visit their website at landbetterment.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Airwing Ventures. Airwing helps determined entrepreneurs seeking resources to grow with capital and connections in order to grow successful companies and impactful legacies. They're all about high-growth companies, high-growth careers, and high-growth communities. I've personally known Dan for about 4 years now, and I've seen the work he's been doing in the community, and we should all be grateful for VCs like him around this area. I encourage you to connect with Airwing and learn more. Let's all connect and grow together. You can email Dan at info@airwing.vc. Their website is www.airwing.vc.
And before we get started, we just want to tell you guys about a great opportunity from our sponsor, Render.capital. So Render.capital is a Louisville-based investment firm with a shared mission of advancing the startup ecosystem in Kentucky and the Midwest. Are you a startup founder who could use $100,000? If so, Render.capital wants you to apply for their 2021 Render competition. The Render competition invests $100,000 into 8 early-stage startups each year to help them scale their solution and attract future investment. Your startup should be one of those startups. Anyone is welcome to apply, and it's super easy. Applications are open now, and the deadline to apply is May 6th. Learn more about the Render competition and apply today at render.capital/competition, or check out today's episode description for a direct link. Again, that's render.capital/competition.
All right, this is a conversation that ever since we talked to Mark on the phone, we've been looking forward to this conversation. I think this is a conversation that doesn't happen enough. I think entrepreneurs get so caught up in their business and what they have to do on the day-to-day that they oftentimes don't talk about what they need to do and take a step back when it comes to family and their faith. And so, Mark, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, glad to be here, Evan. Thank you.
So before we get into, as I mentioned, faith or family, let's talk about your background, where you're from and your professional background. You can start wherever you want.
Yeah. So originally I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, actually not too far away from Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm at now. And my background's kind of varied. It's interesting. I come from a family that my father was a chemical engineer. And so I, at a very young age, started being involved in chemistry projects in my basement using my father's lab equipment. And so I ended up very naturally going into chemical engineering. And so out of that, working at several companies, but kind of surprisingly coming out of it is just this desire I had to kind of build things. And so my background ended up being really varied from that chemical engineering background, even though, the primary business people kind of generally associate me with was MXD Process, which is here in the Louisville area. And we build, process equipment. By that, I mean stainless steel vessels, mixing equipment, automated systems that go associated with that. And but I've got involved in so many other things with medical devices, companies that produce podcasts, from nonprofit organizations that start micro enterprises around the world, and a variety of other kind of infrastructure, kind of tech investments that kind of gave birth out of that. So very hard sometimes even say, well, what's your background? Well, that's the best background that I could give is something like that.
Yeah. And I always like to ask, was entrepreneurship something that you saw an example of, or what brought you to entrepreneurship early on or sometime in your career?
Well, it's interesting, actually, and it ties very much into our discussion here today in terms of faith, because I had no desires for entrepreneurship growing up. There's academia all the way. My father was a professor at the University of Cincinnati. At 17, I was starting to actually even publish some things in the American Journal of Hematology.
Wow.
I was set up for academia, which is, some would say, is kind of the furthest from entrepreneurship that you can imagine. Well, that's not really true, but what really inspired me first into entrepreneurship was really a desire just to try things and do things. And so, I was working for a company in the New Albany area, which is in Indiana. And I just had a chance to be able to take, a leading role in that company at a very young age, just given opportunities in my late 20s to be able to take control of a section of the company and just see what you could do. And it started just inspiring, wow, like there's just freedom to do things that I never imagined being able to do from an academic standpoint. And some of that academic learning actually allows you to kind of feed into trying, more and more activities. And so I had no kind of background in it. I didn't know how to spell entrepreneur growing up. But starting to see that others identify, oh, wait, you're an entrepreneur. Oh, am I? I didn't know that's what this was called. I thought it was just trying fun things and growing them. So yeah, it's really interesting. My father still today is kind of surprised, saying, yeah, didn't expect to see this, but it's good.
Yeah. And let's start to transition now. You mentioned it earlier, it's interwoven with your faith, that entrepreneurship is. And I think faith, and we'll get to it, and family are something that I'm really interested in talking more about and kind of exploring. Faith and family are two things that are, very important to me. I grew up in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and grew up going to Catholic high school and Catholic grade school, and it's always been a part of my life. And then family has always been something that's very important to me. And I can tell, early on, and I'm very early in my entrepreneurship career, that it is going to be something that is either a struggle or something that's always something I'm going to be battling with or thinking about often as I grow as an entrepreneur and as just a person in general. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your take on how you've interwoven those two things into your entrepreneurship career. So let's start with your faith. Walk through your faith journey in a way that you can, in, let's say, not just the quickest way possible, but just summarize it in the best way you can, kind of how you've navigated faith throughout your career or your life.
Yeah, and that's a big question. I'll do the best I can to summarize. I grew up Catholic as well, although it was the type of Catholic that I didn't really know why I was there in church or what I was doing. It was just, something we did as a family.
Just to make a comment there, I kind of felt that at times as well because it was part of my curriculum in school, which kind of confused, am I doing this because it's actually my faith and I've chosen this and it's something meaningful to me, or is this something I'm getting a grade on? And so that was always something that even today I think about, but keep going. I felt that as well.
Yeah. And it was just, you probably had a better understanding than myself in it because I didn't go to Catholic school. I mean, I did have some kind of teaching at the church and such. But really, I didn't integrate it into my life. It wasn't something that was meaningful. It was just something that we did on Sundays. And I actually remember as a early teenager, a conversation in my car that said, after we were done, I sat in the back of the car with my parents after church, and I asked, why are we doing this? And my parents were like, I don't know. I was like, why don't we do something else on Sundays? And they were like, we probably should. And we stopped going to church at that point. And so it wasn't a real important part of my life growing up, but it was interesting as I was kind of getting older, and by that I mean college age, and I'd studied a lot of the physical world. I was in my studies of chemical engineering, really into kind of the physics of the world and kind of interested in astrophysics and these kind of things. This kind of voice of the metaphysics of the world, if you will, of what is going on here. I know that there's more to what I'm looking at than just the physical world. And I started a journey at that point of saying, okay, what are some of the answers to this? What are some of or at least what are some of the questions even to be asking. And this kind of went into an exploratory mode of many of the Eastern religions, is where I started, the spirituality of the Eastern religions, and really kind of ended up in where I never thought I would, because I had discounted, okay, Christianity, I'd seen that when I was growing up, like, don't need to explore that, and kind of looked at everything else and find myself coming back around with this really interesting the Christian melding of actually really the Eastern and Western world together in that, and really coming to see the person of Jesus Christ as this very unique individual that kind of embodied the fulfillment of all kind of the ethical, physical, and non-physical questions I had, and really kind of started my Christian journey there as a sophomore in college. And that really kind of was a seminal event, because I was in pre-med with my chemical engineering work, and there was a sense of, oh wait, like, this changes everything. Like, and there was just a movement. It's just, some of it's the weirdness and some of the things in the Christian world of, well, if you're really passionate about this, I guess you don't need to go be a preacher. So there was this phase like, oh, okay, like, I am passionate about this. I guess I need to go into full-time ministry. And so there was a movement where I was like, okay, I'm going to go into this full-time ministry, but I've got to, I had a new wife at the time. I needed to make some money to get some, let her finish her degree. And I went into the business world at the same time of saying, okay, I'm committed to this faith journey. And that intersection, I was at a multi-billion-dollar automotive company, tier 1, and you may know them from Elizabethtown, Dana Corporation.
Yep, right down from where my dad works at Archibona.
And I was actually in Danville, Kentucky. It was a little different doing head gaskets, but it was same company. And there I really got to kind of explore this. What does it mean to be someone who is a committed Christian in a business context, thinking that was going to be a battle? And in some sense it was, and in some sense it was actually not at all. Like, a lot of the things that I was growing and learning in this kind of the ethics and in the non-physical part of the world were very useful for me to know where to stand in different things. I remember, events where I'm sitting in a meeting with, people, I'm, in my early 20s, and vice presidents of this company sitting in a meeting, and we're talking about, what's the right thing to do here. And I just got and said, well, we can't lie. We can't lie to these people. And we've got to tell them the truth. And my plant manager said, well, if you're going to tell them the truth, then you're going to figure out how to solve this problem by the time Ford is here tomorrow. And I was like, fine, I will. And I walked out of there going, how am I going to do that? And it was like one of the first times where I'm like, I better pray, because I'm going to lose my job. And by God's grace, like I said, okay, I can't lie about this. And so there must be another way out for me. And innovation now took root because of necessity of the ethic. And it allowed me to kind of be very innovative, and then, able to solve the problem, to not lie the next day. And then that group saying, we need to put this guy on the executive fast track. And so it was an interesting, I know it doesn't always turn out like that. But it was an interesting event of looking at, how those things intermingle, and just built on that, started to, see that these things were combined together. I don't need to necessarily go into the ministry to have a great ministry, if you will, of entrepreneurship and fulfilling God's calling in that way, of being able to grow and be, lead in this way, and to encourage others to follow this way of ethical business.
Very interesting. I see. Part of my personal story is my faith was always part of my life from the beginning. My family went to church from the time I was a baby all the way through when I was in high school and went to college every Sunday. And it was part of my curriculum in school from grade school through high school. And I actually kind of had the opposite experience of you, where I started in the faith and then had experiences with going to a planetarium or going and learning about chemistry or philosophy, these things outside of religion. And that kind of made me question things. So you question things kind of in a different direction than I did.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting because I think one thing that, growing up in a faith does is it has a lot of traditional values, and you learn to follow and learn to, because it was part of that curriculum, I just did it because I had to.
Yeah.
But when I started learning about things outside of the faith and learned about philosophy, I started to question more things, and that kind of seeded my interest in things like science and entrepreneurship and technology. So I think that path you take is, that you had taken is interesting. And let's also talk about the fact that it brought ethics into your business career, because is that one of the main things that you felt it has brought to your career in entrepreneurship is ethics? What are some other things that you've noticed that faith has brought to entrepreneurship?
I think it's interesting. That would be like the normal expectation of ethics, but risk assessment is probably a bigger factor of what it does for me. And let me explain that a little bit. And it may have a little bit to do with my background. Like when I was 30, I had to have heart surgery. And, I had just started my first venture on building a medical device company right before that. And, but I wouldn't give up kind of my daytime job. And then I find out, just almost as a fluke, they discover, oh, wait, you have a terrible heart problem. And if we didn't discover this right now, you'd be dead in a few months. And I had to have, kind of emergency surgery on one of my valves. And even this kind of world-renowned doctor looked at it and said, well, this is the second hardest one that I've ever even seen. And so we're going to have to, I can't promise you anything. We'll see. And so I remember going under and thinking, like, you know what? Like, this is the risk of this, of like standing before God and the next time I open my eyes, is so much greater than any of these risks of business or life with family, these kind of things. And I remember coming out of that, like, thank the Lord, totally, almost miraculously able to repair it. And I'm kind of, they were just amazed that it didn't leak at all, and all these kind of things, which we considered an answer to prayer. But it changed me in looking at risk, where I look now at, well, it's not the risk that I do something. It's more of a risk that I don't do something, that I'm living on borrowed time, even though we all kind of, we don't, death is kind of around us and we kind of ignore it all the time, that it's there always. COVID-19 has made it even more prevalent in our lives of thinking about it. So I think it has a lot of relevance today. And so that when I look at risk now, I look at a venture of like, what if I were to get to the end of my life and I allowed fear to rule me rather than faith and stepping out and doing something? And that becomes kind of the biggest change, is that fear doesn't grip my decision making, because I know in the end, I'm living on borrowed time. Like anything I do now is in like bonus, and I can look at things I feel like more appropriately, of saying, yeah, I'm going to go for it. If I fail, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter ultimately, because when I stand before God, He's not going to say, well, 4 of your businesses did well and 2 did well. He's going to look at it and say, hey, good and faithful servant. And His call to us in many ways is to be a good steward of the gifts that we have. And if I have gifts that I'm just holding back either for my own pleasure or for my own fear because I don't want to execute on them, that becomes a greater risk, where I look in the face of God and said, sorry, I was just too afraid. And that's probably the biggest factor that affects how I think about how I think about faith interacting with my entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, that I love that. That's really powerful. I think that allows you. I love the fact that you connected that to risk, because everybody knows that entrepreneurship is largely about risk, and if you fail, having that faith to fall back on, that foundation is so important. And we'll talk about family as well, and I feel like that's also a big part of it. Is that whatever happens in your professional and entrepreneurship career, like you said, you might have a couple failures, might have 4 things that go well, but at the end of the day, those things aren't in the grand scheme of things what matter most to you or to God. So I think that's a really important way to think of it. But I feel like entrepreneurs don't talk about this enough. I feel like they don't talk about faith. It's not something that when they go to conferences and get up on stage that they're even asked to talk about. There's never a mention of faith in any of the media outlets or any of the magazines or interviews that you often see with entrepreneurs. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple reasons. I think first, it feels irrelevant, because I think sometimes we're focused too much on the mechanics of launching businesses and of leadership, and we're not focused as much on the philosophies that underpin good, business practices and good launches. And so it feels irrelevant, but it's not at all. When you look at, just one small example I use, when you look at the primary tenets of that, the Apostle Paul kind of distills the Christian faith and our actions out of it's faith, hope, and love. If you actually take those, and they're so kind of Christian and ethicalized that they're almost hard to think clear. But if you really think about what is faith, hope, and love, faith is the ability to see the unseen and commit to that kind of dedicated, vision with perseverance. Hope is being able to see the future and kind of believing in a path that leads to the good of that. And love is kind of that affection that allows you to look out for what's best of everyone around you, and whether it's vendors or customers or whoever, the world. Those are the main drivers for all the soft skills, if you really think about it, that we need as entrepreneurs to be able to lead, to be able to inspire, to be able to see a vision, and to be able to build a great team that's apart from us personally. And they're actually the ways that entrepreneurs typically fail, is in the soft skills area, because anyone can get the training to build a financial model, but how do you grow in hope? And so I think we ignore these things because they're not seen as relevant, even though I think they're highly relevant. And secondly, I think that people are afraid to talk about this. Even as I prepare for this, I think, I'm putting it out there a bit to share who I am and what this means and my faith. Because, some people may see this as divisive, and there's a history of it being divisive. It's not even like I'm criticizing people for even thinking that way. There's a history of religion being divisive. I think we can handle it in a way that we don't take ourselves so seriously about it all, and that we realize that, some of the people that we most need to learn from are probably the people that have most of the contrary kind of opinions from us. And that when we look at it that way, that we can actually grow and learn. But it's traditionally something that seems divisive, and it truly has been. But I don't think it should be, and it should be talked about. We're really missing out on a lot of what it means to be a whole person when we just ignore this portion of life. Because these entrepreneurs, like when I talk to them privately, can have some, most of the time actually have a deep philosophy that's driving them.
Yeah.
And we just, when we don't bring that in, or it has to conform with kind of one way of thinking, or they get canceled, everyone looks at it and say, I'm not talking, gonna hurt my bit. I'm trying to start a business here. I don't have time to, say this and have to deal with all the consequences of it. But we need to kind of put away the fear of that, and walk forward and be able to share these things, because we have things to teach.
Yeah, I think there is some improvement taking place. I think it's starting with mental health. I think it's starting with entrepreneurs being able to speak openly about their anxiety or their stress. But entrepreneurs are kind of in a way almost expected to keep a straight face and expected not to be vulnerable because it's business first, like you said. They're not supposed to get up on stage and talk about what's wrong with their business or what's wrong with them personally because they've got so many people to answer to and stakeholders. And traditionally, it's not appropriate or even and in the interest of the stakeholders to hear how their personal life's going or their faith or their mental health. And I think that's beginning to change. But a personal story of mine is, I've always kind of been exploring Christianity and my faith because, again, I grew up Catholic and I had those experiences where I began to question things. And I'm still in this transition period where I'm trying to figure out and have a faith of my own and come to it on my own. And I've got involved with a church here in Lexington, and they did a small group session with entrepreneurs and that are involved with their faith. And I would go to that each week, and I would be building this business. And I realized that it was soothing, and it helped me with stress to be there and sit with people and talk about faith, because what it did is it brought a sense of vulnerability, and everybody started talking about their problems and how faith has helped them. And that helped me with my stress. And I realized that other people were going through similar things as I did and how they got through it, whether that was through prayer or spending time with their family or going to church and doing certain things. And that was really helpful. And it took a sense of vulnerability and for me to step out and do that. But I noticed that talking about faith and just putting that at the forefront of these small groups was really a great experience. And I think that is something that needs to be done more. So I'm glad that, we're having this conversation. Hopefully more people begin to open up about it.
Yeah, I hope that one of the businesses that actually instigated us having this conversation, Soterra Capital, which is my private equity firm, that we're actually buying businesses with the desire of cultivating leaders who want to have these type of discussions. And we believe that we actually can create a better return for investors if we actually encourage this type of conversation and integrate it into our leadership training. And so our hope is, and we'll see how it all pans out, our hope is that this, when we encourage, the whole person and to grow the whole person, that these kind of whole people can lead with transparency, boldness, and with a clarity that leads companies to be healthier and everyone on down to be healthier in the organization. And that's our desire.
Yeah, love that. And speaking of the whole person, everybody has family or loved ones that they care about, and they have to balance that with their professional life. So let's talk about family here before we end this. I think when we got on a call, you mentioned you had a pretty big family, if I remember correctly. Talk about that and how you balance, family with your professional career and how your family helps you be a better professional.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife next week, last week of April, whenever this airs, will be giving birth to our 12th child.
Wow.
And I have to always, 12, like 1, 2, no twins, just steady production.
Wow.
My oldest is 18 and is actually kind of going into U of L chemical engineering. So kind of following in dad's footsteps a little bit. And and so it's like people are like, I can't really relate with it. Well, it's kind of the same thing. It's just on a bigger scale that everyone's dealing with family. One of the things, again, it's how I look at risk. It was riskier for me. We had to make a decision early on in our marriage saying, hey, what family size is appropriate for us? And we didn't know the answer to that. Many people don't. And we just kind of said, well, we'll just see what happens, and we'll just trust that we'll get the size that we can best handle. What's interesting is that in this kind of integration of entrepreneurship and family, they're so intertwined for me. Like my family's really engaged in my businesses. They know what's going on. They know my big projects I'm working on, my hopes, my fears. Many times when we were in the businesses where we were looking at, we're going to run out of cash before we really get going. I mean, they sat down and said, okay, we're in this together. We go live in a van down by the river. That's fine. Like, we're in this all together. And that like strength there on, like, you stay there and work as much as you need, dad. Like, we're fine here. Like, there is a great like power that comes from having, a family that's on your side. And that takes some work, because a lot of times it can be very like there's a mistress in the household of the business you're launching.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful that and I can't say I've always done it right. I think sometimes I've gone down a road with that where I'm like, my wife has to kind of call me back and say, Mark, you need to be here. You need to be here. Like, you're drifting away a bit and just getting too involved.
Yeah, I feel like there's a similar analogy you made there of, with your faith, you have something to fall back on. With your family, you have something to fall back on. That's the most fundamental thing about your physical life, is that you've got this family to take care of, and they love you, and that's what you guys share together. And same thing with your faith. You've got this fundamental belief that, you've got this thing, God, that you fall back on and then loves you. And when you go and meet him, you've got just who you are as a person and the decisions you made throughout your life to fall back on and be judged on. I think those two things combined are very powerful. And I do understand now how that empowers you to be a better entrepreneur. I think it makes so much sense, and that's super powerful. I'm glad we're sharing this with our audience. I think time management, real quick, I think you touched on it there. You've struggled with it, but what kind of tips do you have as far as time management and family? What are some high level things that you do maybe in your own life that you found work?
Yeah, I do put family first. So here's what's happened sometimes, but that's not always an easy decision. Like I said, sometimes the family says, "Go make this happen," but there's times where, I just remember praying this. I leave the business. I go, like, God, like, you don't want me to fail as a father. You don't want me to be just an absent father. I know that. I don't know whether you want me to have a big business. So I'm not going to be an absent father. And you're just gonna have to give me business if you want this to be a bigger business. And then I pray that prayer very frequently, as something where it's almost realigning my thinking too, is just saying, like, I don't want to be an absentee father. Like, I've just seen that so many times. And so, I would rather sacrifice the business and growing. But there's just a fundamental trust that, like, okay, like, it may not be that. You're just going to have to make it happen. And sometimes I have sacrificed the business. I know I could grow it faster if I traveled more, if I, were to do more, dinners to raise money faster. Like, you just have to be at peace with knowing that, there's a framework of balance that's required, that you just can't feel guilty about. You just have to say, hey, like, in the end, I'm happier with this decision. Like, how many millions my business has grown to will not be what, I sit on my front porch thinking about. It's going to be sitting up and watching the grandchildren playing and knowing I have a relationship with them, and I've been able to build into their lives that they're going and caring for more and more people, and that's what's going to be rewarding.
Man, love that. That's I keep saying it. It's just so powerful because, I think there's this consumer culture. There's this idea of, making a lot of money, and entrepreneurship's one of the easiest paths to that. And it's not. It's, first of all, entrepreneurship's really hard, but, I think people put the wrong guiding light on what they do for a living or what they want to do with their life. And it's sometimes materialistic or driven by money. And I think by putting, faith and family, it gives you a better thing to aim for. True legacy comes with a family, comes with, having, like you said, grandchildren that carry on, your beliefs and your what your mark on the world and how you want to be remembered, and that lives on through them. It doesn't live on through necessarily the money you make or the business, because businesses come and go, but your legacy from a family is always there. I really, really think this is an important topic to talk about, and I'm glad you are.
Yeah, it's like impact investing. Like, a lot of people are talking about and starting funds that do impact investing, and I really love that language and how to think about it. I just think we can think about it even in a larger way of, like, what does it mean to be able to, through the mechanisms of faith and family, to really inform the why of impact investing. Because sometimes we say, hey, I want to have this investment that really helps the environment, okay, that's great. I think, being able to, be environmentally responsible is great, but why? Well, the answer of the why is many of, hey, God's called us to be a steward of this world, and our family saying, hey, like, let's have kids so that we both prepare something good to that we've preserved here, and then populate people into it that can enjoy it. And so it kind of pulls it all together. I think it's actually some of the missing components that will allow us to have sustainable impact investing. And so I'm hopeful that will be something that, gets inculcated into that movement, that I think will really empower to have generational impact.
Yeah, you want to leave the world a better place for your kids and your grandkids. Makes a ton of sense. Okay, now let's transition here to the Louisville ecosystem. You're in the Louisville ecosystem. You're an active member, very active member. What are some things you've seen in the ecosystem, both good and bad, and what are some things that need to be done more or need to be done less?
Yeah, it's interesting. The ecosystem has been very helpful for me, especially I'm an Endeavor entrepreneur, and that, the support of that is tremendous. Mostly it's to like, where it's helpful, I think it's good, is it gets us out of our rut of relationships. So we have like a vein of what we're comfortable with as an entrepreneur that we've done. And we have a tendency to want to stay in that. What the ecosystem does well, I think, is to introduce you to others that, think differently, can give you some other perspectives. And I think it does do that well. Kind of areas of improvement, I would say, is just, more on-ramps for people. It feels very like insular, I know this person, and that person then introduces me to this other person, and it's kind of the same people a lot of times. And I was like, man, I want to make more opportunity for people. And so that's a little what I'm trying to do with Soterra, is say, how do I make, for people that don't normally have opportunity to be an entrepreneur, how do I make opportunity? And I'd love to see kind of more of that. Also just more opportunity to have kind of gatherings of, and again, COVID more difficult, but even before COVID, how do we publicize and just create communities that do like what you did with in Lexington there with your church, like let people just be exposed to entrepreneurs and the realness of it. Because sometimes, like, a lot of people's perception is that they're like the priests of business or something, that they're, on high, and they're, they were able to do this, and when they actually talk to us, they're like, no, we're just like you.
Normal people.
I mean, we just had an idea and hey, it worked, and now we're going to press into it. And so that when people see that the shelf is actually a lot lower than they think, I would love to create opportunities where people see, that shelf being a lot lower, and so that others can join us in what we're doing. Because I think that if you can be an entrepreneur, you should. If you can start a business, you should. And that sounds like a very wow, that's pretty directive. But I do think that it is one of those things that there's so much freedom that comes with it, that you have a freedom to serve others in a greater way when you're an entrepreneur, and make the time to do that we should do it if we can.
Yeah. And Endeavor, you mentioned Endeavor. Endeavor's been great. We've had a great relationship with Endeavor. They've given us intros to so many awesome entrepreneurs, you included, that have led to so many important conversations. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, with Middletech. Is I think one of the things you mentioned that you think could improve is there just needs to be more activity, more discussions. And I think at the fundamental basis of all that is just more conversation with entrepreneurs that can be shared. Whether that is in a small group session, whether that's in front of a crowd or at a conference or like a podcast. I 100% would love to see more people getting out there and speaking about entrepreneurship in settings that traditionally aren't speaking about entrepreneurship, whether that is at a church or at universities. Universities, believe it or not, don't talk about entrepreneurship a lot. Yeah. I realized that when I was at UK, and now we're trying to change that. I think that needs to happen more, and that's what we're trying to do, here at Middle Tech. But yeah, I think that one of the things you mentioned as well is access. Talk about, real quick, last question here related to the ecosystem, access to capital. We had Patrick Henshaw on last episode, who's with Access Ventures and Render Capital, and that's one of his main objectives, is bringing more capital to people that need it or missed or are underserved. What are you seeing in the ecosystem related to venture?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, Access Ventures. Actually, I helped start Access Ventures with Bryce Butler, if you know he is, and it was at the same time I was starting MXD, and it was kind of the same kind of vein and desire. But I do think that access to capital, it's very insular. Like, if you know people, it's actually not that hard to get capital. When you don't, it seems like so difficult. Yeah. And I would love to see, capital being, again, brought to a lower shelf and being able to say, okay, how do we build people up and at the same time as bringing them access to capital? Yeah. Because that's the whole thing, like why there's a lot of capital fear. I mean, there's a lot of capital available in our state, but there's, when new entrepreneurs aren't kind of have a mechanism for them being built up, there's just a lot of fear to invest in them when it's so unproven. And so if we can create ways that these entrepreneurs can be developed, I think best in these holistic ways that actually create trust, and that I think that some of the capital will flow more easily to them. So, I mean, you talk about faith, like when you're connecting at a faith level with somebody, you have more trust to invest with them. I don't want to use, religion as some way to, manipulate, but there is camaraderie that comes and a unified kind of set of ethics that when you say, yeah, I'm committed to who Christ was and becoming like him, like when an investor kind of says, I'm committed to that too, it actually creates a commonality that can bridge some of the things that are problematic. And that's why some of that being shared, I think, is healthy. And that would go to other religions too that have kind of similar ethical kind of veins, that kind of understanding of who they are, I think builds trust and builds bridges across different even religious kind of normal categories into some of the universals that are there among many of the religions.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Well, Mark, thank you very much for coming on and speaking about this subject. As I said, it's something I really look forward to talking more about, and I think our audience is going to find a lot of value in this. It's so important. Faith and family are two things that I know I put central in my life, and I'm working on faith. It's something that's, I think, a journey all throughout your life, and I think we need to view it that way and put it on a pedestal because it is important. I think a lot of the lessons that you shared, I'm going to take away and apply to my own life, and I hope many others do that as well. So really appreciate you coming on and sharing, your perspective on these things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ethan, for the opportunity to share. I mean, it's really, it's something, Evan, that I don't get to do very often other than just in like my normal life. And I'm just really glad that you kind of took the risk yourself in putting this out here and what you shared. And I hope that it's an example to others that, hey, it's safe to do this. It really is. And that, if there are some risks, it's really ones that are worth taking. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was refreshing. When we got on the phone and I said, what are some things we can talk about? You have so many things to talk about. And you mentioned faith and family. We didn't talk about that on that call. And I was like, yes, that sounds great because that's something that we haven't talked about. And I know that I care deeply about and our audience will. So again, just thank you. I think it's really important.
All right. Take care. Thank you.